Hi everyone, welcome. You should know me by now. I'm Rebecca. I'm the Bee Biosecurity Officer for Queensland, and this is the third in the second series of Bee Biosecurity online talks. Tonight we are joined by Susie and Kelly, who are our production team, and Susie is taking the reins for the first time tonight, so thanks Susie. And we have Hamish again, and Hamish is an apiary officer here in Queensland, and he's going to help me out with the questions. So let's start quickly with a couple of thank yous. I really want to thank everyone who took the time to do the survey. I've got some fantastic feedback, particularly suggestions for future talks. I'm going to keep that survey open for another couple of weeks. So if you still want to provide feedback and you want to incorporate feedback from the second talks as well, that would be fantastic, particularly suggestions about things that you want to hear in the future or ways that we can improve these online talks. I also want to thank the people who have given me some feedback about the templates that I've sent out for record keeping after last week's talk. There's been some excellent suggestions already. We're going to keep getting suggestions and refining those for probably another 2 to 3 weeks at least, maybe a little longer. We'll see how people go. I know it will take a while for people to have a go at them and try them out and see how they work. So feel free to keep sending in your feedback on those. That's been really helpful. And if you didn't get the templates, that's because you must not be on my mailing list. And if you want to be on my mailing list to hear more about upcoming talks, as well as any in-person demonstrations or visits that I'm doing, just send me a quick email and I'll put my email up at the end and I'll add you to our mailing list. I'm heading off up north in October, so there'll be a few dates coming up in my next talk and I'll let you know what those are. And then hopefully November, heading out further west and around the Brisbane area. So there's lots of in-person, as long as COVID lets me keep doing it, talks and demonstrations coming up in the coming months. So let's move on now to tonight's topic, and that is good bee husbandry. Now, why is good bee husbandry important? Well, it's really essential to maintain a productive hive. Now, depending on what you're wanting a productive hive, whether you just are wanting a hive for the fun of it and to have bees in your backyard, whether you want a productive hive for pollination or you're wanting to produce honey, you need to have good husbandry in place for that hive to continue to be effective. Good husbandry is also important in preventing and managing pests and diseases. If you remember back to when we talked about particularly brood diseases, if your hive is strong and able to repel pests and diseases, it will be able to stay healthy longer. And good husbandry is a key component of that. You also need to maintain good bee husbandry to meet your general biosecurity obligation. It's important to help prevent nuisance bees, bees becoming a problem with your neighbours and bees swarming and generally being a bit of a difficult situation. And it's important to have good bee husbandry to minimise losing your bees through swarming if that's something that you want to try and prevent. And I think what we sometimes forget is that it's also really fun to have good bee husbandry. Lots of people, including myself, keep bees for the fun of it because we enjoy tinkering, we enjoy seeing what's going on and looking after our bees. So don't forget, good bee husbandry is also really fun. So because many of our beekeepers are new, I want to start by quickly going through the different components of the hive so that everybody's on the same page before we start talking about the different components in context. So let's start at the bottom. At the bottom of your hive, you should have a stand of some kind. It might look like the one here in the picture. It might just have 4 legs and be a bit of a wooden or metal base. Stand is really important, particularly here in Queensland, where we have cane toads. You want to keep it up out of the reach of cane toads, which can spread disease and also kind of like snacking on your bees from time to time. It can also help minimise other pests, things like ants. If you keep it up off the ground, it's further for them to have to travel into your hive. On top of the stand, you'll have a bottom board. It might look solid like this one here, or it might be more of a grill or grate. And those bottom boards are ones designed for minimising a small hive beetle within your hive. On top of the bottom board, you'll have your brood box, and that's where the baby bees live, and that's where the queen bee lives, and that's where all the reproduction goes on. So that's a really key component of your hive. On top of that brood box, you'll have a queen excluder, just sort of a grill or a grate. It stops the queen going from the brood box up into the honey supers. And that's important because we want to keep those two areas really separate. Keep the breeding going on in the bottom and just have the top for honey. And that's important because when it comes to extracting your honey, you don't want a mixture of baby bees and honey and all in together, because it won't go very well for you. And when it comes to extracting, you'll end up with just a mush of all sorts of things, which is not so good. So you want that queen excluder in there. So above your queen excluder, you might have one, maybe two supers. They could be half ones, as you can see in this photo, or full supers. And that's where that honey gets stored. So that's where the good stuff is. And if you've got a flow hive, that's where you'll have the plastic frames and the little tubes that go in the front to get the honey out. On top of your honey supers, you'll have a couple of covers or lids, usually two. So an inner cover and then a bit more of a sort of a roof. So that's the components of your hive. Now let's quickly go over the basic components of husbandry, and then I'm going to talk about each of these in a bit more detail. So let's go first to setting up your hive and make sure it's set up appropriately. Then we'll talk about making sure you've got a healthy young laying queen, that you've got plenty of food, so plenty of nectar and pollen, water's available for your bees. You've got plenty of space available for those bees to move, so produce more brood and to have more honey storage. That your pests and diseases are managed, that your hive is dry and well ventilated and has limited entrances, and you've got some good housekeeping in place. So let's start with hive setup. You want to put your hive in a sunny site. Now this is important because the bees like it warm and sunny, and it helps them regulate the temperature within the hive. It also gives them a bit of an advantage against the pests. Most of those pests that we've talked about and those diseases we've talked about in the past prefer it to be cooler and damper. So if it's warmer and drier, it's better for the bees and it's less good for the pests and diseases. In extremely hot areas, you may want to consider providing some shade at the hottest times of the year during the hottest times of the day. And it depends on where you live, whether or not that might be important. But consider it when you go to put up your hive, whether or not that might be a place where you could include a structure like that if need be. Now, if you've got a choice about where you put your hive, it's preferable to put it on hard clay soil. If you remember back to when we talked about small hive beetle, the larvae of small hive beetle come out of the hive and pupate in the soil. And so they want to be able to easily crawl down into the soil so they can pupate. And if it's hardened clay, they can't get in and they often perish. And so it minimises the number of small hive beetle that are going to mature and get back in your hive. So if you can, put it on hard clay soil. Have your bees close to a water source, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. And if you can put them away from work areas or high traffic areas, areas that are accessed often, that's also really important. It stops your bees getting hurt by constantly knocking into things, you know, being hit by cars, but it also prevents that conflict between the bees and the people. It stops people getting stung, it stops people getting angry, it stops that conflict. And if you're going to get bees into a new area, make sure you've discussed the location of them with the people in that local area. So your neighbours, other people in your household, your family, so that they know that it's going on and you can have a bit of a dialogue. Particularly, it's really important because quite a few people have really severe anaphylactic allergic reactions to bees, and it can result in death. And so just making sure that everyone's aware and is on board with your bees will just make things a lot better and will help prevent those types of accidents or incidents. So let's move on now to the most important bee in your hive, and that is the queen bee. And so because she's really, really important, we want to take care of her and make sure that she's doing the job that she should be doing. So you should regularly check your hive, and you know, if you're checking your hive regularly for pests and diseases, that's when a great time to check it for your queen is as well. So check that she's both present and that she is laying. So how do you identify your queen? Your queen might be marked, like you can see in the photo here. She'll have a little bit of paint on her thorax, and that paint will be a specific colour, usually that goes by particular years for particular colours. but she may not be, and often bees aren't marked, and so you'll have to try and pick her out amongst all the other bees that are in the hive. This can be tricky, particularly if you're a beekeeper, but if you do it regularly, you'll start to get your eye in for it. She looks a bit different to the other bees in that she is much longer than the other bees in the hive, and she's slim, so she's got a very slender abdomen. If you see bees that are a little bit bigger than the others, but they're still kind of fat, wide and buffy, and they're a little darker, those are drones. So it can be easy to kind of go, oh, look, that's the bee that looks different. That must be the queen. Not necessarily. Make sure it's not a drone. Your queen needs to be that long, slim looking insect. Now, if you can find the queen, great. And even if you can't, it's not such a big problem, but we do want to check, even if we have her or we don't, that she has been laying eggs. She's being productive. She's doing her job. And so you want to look for eggs, even if you find your queen. And to look for eggs, pull out your frames, check for the queen first. If you can find her, great. If you can't, or even if you can, give it a couple of, put her back if you've got her. If she's not on that frame, give it a couple of little shakes. Shake the bees off so you can see all of the cells really clearly. Then hold them up so you've got the sun coming over your shoulder and look at inside the cells. Now you have to look really carefully for the eggs. They're quite tiny. They'll be in the bottom of the cells and they'll look just little like creamy coloured rods, as you can see here. And so if you've got eggs in your hive, you can be pretty sure that there's a queen in there and that she's laying and she's healthy. So that's a really important indicator to make sure that your hive's healthy. You can also have a quick look and see if you've got larvae of different ages. And you can see on the photo on the side of the screen here that you've got from very tiny through to much older larvae and then right through to capped larvae in this picture. And that's a sign that the queen has been consistently producing larvae. If there's a big gap, if there's no adult larvae and just eggs, it's not a big problem, but you may find you're going to get a dip in the number of bees that you're going to have because she may have been out of action for a while. And from time to time, you may need to replace your queen. And there's a few different reasons you might need to replace her. If she's missing, then you'll need to make sure you've got a queen in there. Otherwise, nobody's laying eggs, so there's no baby bees, and the number of bees in your hive will just slowly decline as the ones that are there get older and die, and then you'll have no bees. So if she's not there, if she's missing, you'll need to put a new queen in. If she's not laying, you'll have the same problem because you won't have new bees. If your bee numbers are really, really low, it often is because she's not being productive and not laying enough. And this can just be because she's old. So once queens get to 2-3 years old, their level of productivity drops off dramatically. And so we really suggest that if you can, requeen every 2 to 4 years, it'll keep your hive far more productive. And when it goes to choosing a queen, if you can choose one that's calm and possibly, if you can, a hygienic queen. These can be hard to come by and often fairly expensive. Now, someone in our office tried to get a queen this week and had a bit of difficulty. So they're in quite high demand at the moment. So if you think you want to requeen your hive, try and get onto and order one as soon as you can because it may take a few weeks. So how do you get a new queen? Well, usually a new queen is sent to you in the mail, which is, I know, a bit strange, but it's perfectly safe for her to be sent through the mail. Or you can, of course, pick them up yourself. Now, I'm going to tell you a story here to hopefully you remember when it does come to your turn to get a new queen. When I was a brand new beekeeper, I needed to get a new queen for my hive and I ordered one and I went to the person's house to pick up the new queen and he wasn't there, but he'd left me a note to say, here's the queen, leave the money, all good. I went and found these little cages with bees in them and went, this is what I'm looking for, but I just need one. So I took just one bee and left the rest. And of course, I'd taken a worker bee home. So our queens are always sent to us or we pick them up with some helpers in there to look after her. So you want to keep all those ones in there to look after the queen. So your queen will come in a little cage with the helpers. She'll also have a little plug in the end of that cage that'll contain some wax and some food. And slowly over time, she'll eat and the helpers will eat their way out, and then she'll